I've said this in many videos, so I know a lot of you already know, but the burden of proof falls on the prosecution. The defense, they don't have to prove a thing. All they have to do is introduce doubt, to make you doubt, to ask you, has the prosecution proven that Mr. Kohberger committed these crimes? Alright guys, so yesterday I posted a video and it was going over the defense's objection to the state's motion for protective order. And in that motion, it said that there was absolutely no DNA from the residents of 1122 King Road in Bryan Kohberger's car, apartment, office, or home. Now, apartment, home, I don't know, maybe they're referring to his parents' house as home. Who knows? But there was no evidence from any of the victims of 1122 King Road in Bryan Kohberger's personal property. It also went on to expand and say that there was no connection between Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho 4 at all. None whatsoever. There's nothing that the prosecutor has turned over to the defense that connects Bryan Kohberger to the victims. If that's the case, then what case could the state possibly have? Well, I had a commenter, and they felt like they were going to enlighten me on what case the state may possibly have. So let's go ahead and read this comment, and then we're going to do a mock trial, somewhat, a YouTube-style mock trial, to go over their evidence and show how the defense could easily tear it to shreds. Let's read. No, the defense is glossing over the fact that he turned his phone off while he left Washington during the time of the murders at 3 a.m. and turned it back on as he returned home at 5 a.m. They are also glossing over the fact that he's on video arriving at the murder house. They're also glossing over the fact that he was ID'd by an eyewitness, and they're also glossing over the fact that his DNA is on the knife sheath snap. He's guilty beyond any doubt. Now, that's mind-blowing to me. Let's go ahead and destroy that. So let's start with your first claim that the defense is glossing over the fact that he turned his phone off while he left Washington during the time of the murders at 3 a.m. and turned it back on as he returned home at 5 a.m. So let's say he left his home in Washington at 3 a.m. and then his phone turns off. It's off. It's not producing a signal. So you're telling me right now that you don't have his GPS coordinates from his phone of where he went. So you can't prove to me that Bryan Kohberger went to 1122 King Road by his cell phone, right? You just can't. His phone was off during the time of the murders. So his phone cannot be used to prove that Bryan Kohberger was at 1122 King Road between the times of 4 and 4:25 to commit these crimes. Can't prove it, right? Anything could have happened with his phone. His phone could have died when he left his house at 3 a.m. and he didn't have a charger with him. And he didn't get a charger or have a way to charge his phone until 5 a.m. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's another possibility. That's another reasonable possibility. Let's go over something else that people have said, right? Let's go over the idea that why would Bryan Kohberger drive his own car to commit such a crime? Maybe he didn't. So let's say that somebody else didn't want to take their car either, right? So they take Mr. Kohberger's car. And on their way there, they realize that his phone's in the car and it's on. And they don't want to give up that tracking information. So they reach over and somebody else turns off Mr. Kohberger's phone. and they go to the house and they commit the crimes. And then they come back and then they say, oh, I don't want anybody to know that I took this car. I don't want nobody to know that I was in this car whatsoever. So let me turn this phone back on like I found it and leave the car like I found it, and he'll never know. I'm not driving my own car to commit such a crime. Well, I mean, it's reasonable to think that somebody might steal somebody else's car to go do something like this. It's reasonable to think that the phone could be in there. Bryan Kohberger doesn't have to prove that this happened, mind you. It just has to be an option of something that could have happened, because that's reasonable doubt. Think about it. Now, let's move on. They're also glossing over the fact that he's on video arriving at the murder house. Now, I haven't seen, maybe you have, maybe you can enlighten me, but I haven't seen a single claim that they have a video of Bryan Kohberger arriving at 1122 King Road. I haven't heard that they have a single video of Bryan Kohberger on camera that night, anywhere, from any place, a store, much less 1122 King Road. And we already know that his phone was off, so he wasn't there according to his phone, right? And then you don't have video of him. I'm sure what you mean here is that there's video of his car. But let's take a step back and say, well, what if somebody else drove his car? Why would Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD, why would he drive his own personal car to commit such a heinous crime? What if somebody else had access to Mr. Kohberger's car and they drove it and committed this crime? What if? That's if you allow that it is Mr. Kohberger's car on the camera, which nobody can prove. There is no shot of the tag. There is no shot of the driver. There is no identifying feature on the picture of the car that we're aware of that matches Bryan Kohberger's. So we can't even say that that is Bryan Kohberger's car on camera. I mean, the cops didn't really think it was. They thought it was a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. Bryan Kohberger's car is a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. Now, sure, those body styles, they do look a lot alike, but if police thought it was possible that it could be a 2015, why would they not have said a 2011 to a 2015 or 2016 Hyundai Elantra? They didn't think that was possible. They didn't think Mr. Kohberger's car fit the description. Best believe the defense, they're going to tell that to the jury. They're going to make the jury understand that the cops were not even looking for the type of car that Mr. Kohberger was driving. It's close, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, right? Let's move on. They're also glossing over the fact that he was ID'd by an eyewitness. Now, it's hard to fight back a smile on this one, because the eyewitness that I assume you're referring to is Dylan Mortensen, right? The one who looked out the door multiple times because she heard what was going on. And then the last time that she opened the door, she saw a man dressed all in black, wearing a mask, walking down the hallway in the dark. But she did recognize that he had bushy eyebrows. So see, nowhere that the public is aware of, mind you, the public is aware of, because that's all we can really go off of. We can't assume that they have something that they don't have, right? So we're going off of what we know about. And nowhere did they say that Dylan Mortensen said she saw Bryan Kohberger. Nowhere did they say that Dylan Mortensen pointed Bryan Kohberger out of a lineup. All they said was she saw a guy dressed all in black, wearing a mask with bushy eyebrows. And we know she must not have been able to see him too well, or she would have noticed that he had to have had blood on him, right? Or he had to be carrying a knife, or at least something to put the knife in. So she couldn't have seen him that well, and she did not ID Bryan Kohberger. She ID'd a guy with bushy eyebrows wearing a mask, which could be a whole lot of guys in Idaho. Trust me. Let's move on. And they're glossing over the fact that his DNA is on the knife sheath snap. He's guilty beyond any doubt. Okay, so let's agree, because this isn't breaking news, even though every media agency and YouTuber tried to make it breaking news last week. Yes, it's Bryan Kohberger's DNA on the snap of the knife sheath. This snap, not the button, not the leather, but this little snap right here. Now, that DNA could have been from November 13th, 2022. It could have happened while Bryan Kohberger was inside the house at 1122 King Road committing these murders. He could have left his DNA on that. But you would think that if his DNA was going to be on that knife sheath, that his DNA would be somewhere else. That they would have his DNA from somewhere else. Right? Like if he's not wearing gloves to get his DNA on the knife sheath when he touches it, then other things that he touched between murdering 4 people up close and personal with a knife, you would think that his DNA would be somewhere, or possibly he could have got injured while committing these crimes. But no, it's just minuscule touch DNA that was so small that the Idaho lab couldn't even put the profile together. They had to send it to another lab, a specialty lab, for them to put the profile together. And then they were able to match it to Bryan Kohberger's father. And then once they arrested Bryan Kohberger, they swabbed Bryan Kohberger, and lo and behold, it matched him too. But that doesn't tell us that Bryan Kohberger was in the house. It could mean that. But remember, the defense doesn't have to prove that he wasn't in the house on November 13th. The prosecutor has to prove that he was. And all that DNA on that snap of that sheath, mind you, I didn't say knife, I said sheath, so it's not the murder weapon that his DNA was found on, but a very hard to reach spot on a knife sheath that was left behind. Could he have touched it that night? Yeah. Or he could have touched it a year before, or a few days before, or a month before. He could have touched that at any point in history. He could have touched something else, and someone else transferred that small amount of DNA onto the knife sheath by accident or on purpose. Remember, I don't have to prove it because I'm not prosecuting. All I have to do is introduce doubt. Are you sure that DNA being on that knife sheath that was found at the crime scene of a party house puts Bryan Kohberger as the murderer? I'm not sure about that. Now, if it was the murder weapon and his DNA was on the murder weapon, that would be a little bit different. Now, I know you can say, well, it's the sheath. The weapon goes with the sheath. If he touched the sheath, he had to touch the weapon. Nope. You got to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. And you have failed. Not only have you failed to prove that all of these things happen, but you have failed to prove that any of these things happen. There is doubt on whether he turned his phone off or not. There is doubt as to whether that's his car or that he was in his car on that video of that white Elantra. There is doubt that the eyewitness was talking about Bryan Kohberger, and there is doubt on when his DNA got on that knife sheath. So tell me how that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Bryan Kohberger committed the crimes at 1122 King Road on November the 13th, 2022. I'll wait. Let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel to see more, hit that notification bell so you'll get notified every time I post. Have a great day, and we'll see you later.